Welcome, everyone. I'm sharing this story today because I feel like moving forward, anyone that watches any of our videos is going to notice the big elephant in the room, which is the lack of conversation about our third daughter, Grace, and what has actually happened with her. And although this isn't technically part of what I said I would share, I feel like it's something that I need to get out so that it fills in the gaps for people. And I feel like it's also something that is worth sharing. Losing my daughter to leukemia was the hardest thing that I've ever faced in my life. Nothing has ever come close, and I don't think anything else apart from any other issues occurring with my kids will ever come close. So I hate even putting that out into the universe. But yeah, I just thought I needed to put this out there. People can watch it or not, but it's just something that I don't want to have to keep kind of bringing up or explaining, or even get comments where people say, oh, she doesn't talk about her third daughter. Well, this might help explain why. So to get started, Gracie, as we called her from pretty much day one, was born on April Fool's Day, 1st of April 2003, and it was absolutely such a joyous occasion. She was a little bit of a surprise. She wasn't planned, um, and as unplanned as you can be when you're married and you're not worried if you're not planning to have children, but you're not planning to have children. We already had two. We were thinking that maybe one more, and then we'd call it a day. So when I found out I was pregnant with Grace, it was happy news. And when we found out it was another little girl, my husband kind of just shook his head and laughed, and um, it was what it was. So yeah, it was a relatively easy pregnancy. Unfortunately, I can't go into labor by myself, and I always have to get induced with all five of my children. I've never gone into labor, and I always seem to go over a little bit in terms of my due date. So Grace was born a week actually after her due date, and yeah, it was a really good labour. They induced me. I had her 47 minutes later, or something close to that. It was something really. It's bad to say that I get all the kids muddled up now in terms of their times they were born and all that sort of stuff. But I'm getting old and they're getting old, so yeah, it was a really quick labour anyway. And she scored on the APGAR test. She was like a 9, and she weighed 9 pounds. She looked super healthy, and it was all wonderful. We went home after 2 days, and we kind of just settled into life with her big sister, with Greg, of course, my husband, and her big sister Jade, who was about 4.5 when she was born, and her other big sister Haley, who had just turned 2 in February. So, I had my hands full, but it was wonderful, and she was perfect. I will say that, and I know when I say this to people, it's kind of weird. I don't know what made me do it because I didn't do it with Jade and Haley, but I would sit there when I was breastfeeding her and rock her and look at her and say, "You're meant to be." Like I would whisper that to her. I'd say, "You're meant to be. You're meant to be." And I don't know why I said that because I didn't say it to Jade and Haley, although they were also meant to be. Something in me was saying, like, I have to convince you that you're meant to be. You're meant to be here. Um, but I would say it was probably around when she was 2 or 3 weeks old. I first suggested to the doctor that I was concerned, or even at the health checkup with the nurses that you go and see for the baby checkups, I said, I'm worried she's sleeping so much. Like I'm having to wake her up to feed her. And that's really weird. And doctors and nurses were saying to me, enjoy it. Why are you not enjoying this? And I remember saying, well, this isn't my first rodeo, and I know that, you know, this is not what I would consider to be usual after already, having gone through this twice already with my other two children. So I was already worried about the sleeping. And then when she was about 6 weeks old, Greg was giving her a bath, and he said to me, "Oh, what's the deal with she's got a little bruise on her back." And I was like, "Oh, show me, let's have a look." And so we're both looking at it, and I'm thinking to myself, how do you get a bruise on the back of a baby unless you've kind of bumped them or you've done something, you've held them too tight, whatever it may be. I just thought it was really odd. And it was probably the size of a 20-cent piece. Like it wasn't huge, but it was like, well, how did that get there? So I made a doctor's appointment and I took her and I said, look, she's sleeping a lot and now she's got a bruise on her back. I'm just getting really concerned. And it wasn't my usual doctor that was there that day. And they said, oh, it looks like a birthmark. And I said, well, just by the nature of what it's called, should this not have been here when she was first born? Like, this has actually just come up. It isn't something that's been here since she was born. I would like to get a referral to a pediatrician because no one's listening to me. And this doctor basically made me feel like I was being crazy. And I said, look, I really want a referral to a pediatrician, or I'll just go to another doctor. So they actually gave me a referral. And then things just seemed to get progressively worse, and I was waiting for the referral. She wasn't sick in the traditional sense, in that, she wasn't throwing up, and it wasn't that she wasn't eating. She was still eating. It was just that I was having to wake her up to feed her, and she just was really lethargic, and she didn't kind of, like by 6 weeks, they're doing things and they're reacting, and it just seemed like it was nothing was really going on, and it was concerning me more and more. So I thought, no, I'll wait for the pediatrician. Um, but yeah, it was just getting worse. And then just she was about 12 weeks old. It was the 27th of June, actually. I'll never forget the date. And she started throwing up the night before, so the 26th of June. And I was really worried because not only was she lethargic, not only was she not waking up for me to feed her. On top of that, I'm now thinking, well, she's throwing up and she's going to be dehydrated. I was breastfeeding, but I tried to put some water in a bottle to try and get a little bit of water into her. I was trying to syringe some water, and she wasn't keeping anything down. And that kind of went on most of the night. And I just thought, I'm taking her to the hospital. Enough is enough. So it was actually really early in the morning, and I rang my mum and I said, could you come over and watch um, Haley? Because I believe Jade must have been at preschool that day or something. I'm pretty sure it was just Haley with us. Forgive me if I can't remember these things. Some things I've blocked out for this day, or I just can't remember. It was 2003. So I said to Mum, I'm taking her to the hospital. And so we got in the car and went to the hospital. And I walked in, and usually when you go into the hospital, you go up to the counter, they get a couple of details, they make you sit down, they then bring you into like a little room where they weigh them and do all sorts of things, and then they make you go and sit out there again and all that sort of stuff. Unless you come in an ambulance, that's usually how things progress. But I walked up to the counter with her in my arms, and she was white as a sheet by this time. And I said, I'm really worried about my baby. I need some help. And the nurse behind the counter looked at Grace, walked around, took my arm, and said, come through here. We didn't even go, I didn't get told to sit down. We didn't get taken into the little room. And I'd been there a couple of times because Haley seemed to get croup a lot. And, there were bits and pieces that had happened over the years, as they normally do with kids, that you end up in the emergency room for whatever reason. And I thought, well, wow, this is scary now because they haven't even made me sit down. She's just taken my arm and taken me through these double doors. And although it's a bit of a blur to me now, I just remember the putting her tiny little body on the big bed, and her just being surrounded by people. All of a sudden, people were just surrounding her and working on her, and they got a cannula in and they were giving her fluids and they took bloods, and there was just this big bustle. And probably about 20 minutes after that, uh, a, a nurse or doctor came up to me and said, you need to ring your husband. And I would learn to hate those words because they were always for me, I used to call it the portent of doom. Um, and they said, we need to talk about what's happening with Grace. So I called Greg, and I remember him telling me he did this really crazy U-turn on the freeway because he was heading somewhere, and he just kind of cut across the nature strip and headed for the hospital. And he came in and they sat us down and they just said, we're waiting for the doctor to come down from oncology. And I will admit, I heard the word oncology, but it didn't even compute in my brain what they might be saying to me at that moment. And I sat down with Greg, and I just looked at him and started crying. I didn't even know yet what was going on. I was just scared. And a doctor came down, Dr. Kent Robertson, who's still my hero to this day. He was absolutely amazing, and he looked after us so beautifully, and he was such a kind man on top of being a really smart, wonderful doctor. But he was actually from America. He'd come over to Australia, I think, to do some research and be a doctor, an oncology doctor, a pediatric oncology doctor. And we sat down, and he came in and he sat down next to us, and he told us that our daughter had leukemia, and that it was really bad, and that she had a 5%. Well, they didn't know if she would make it through the night, or the day and the night, and that um, based on the information they had in front of them, that she had about a 5% chance of making it. So we got taken up to ICU, and once there, she was hooked up to all sorts of machines. She actually had to be taken in. Actually, I don't know if that happened straight away. I'm losing my timing, but essentially, she had to get um, a central line put in, and it had like two. It's basically what they stick in them so they don't have to keep jabbing them with needles. I think that might have happened a few days later, and then they would just put all their medication and chemo and all that sort of stuff through the central line, as opposed to having like a cannula in. So, um, yeah, we went up to ICU, and they said, look, if we can get through tonight, then we'll just take it day by day. And I think I have blocked out that night to a degree. I just remember trying to hold her and not being able to because she was on a bed and I wasn't allowed to get on the bed with her. I think things have changed a lot since then. They're a lot more open to parents being closer to their kids because they know how important it is. But I was breastfeeding, and so I was having to pump milk because I couldn't feed her while she was attached to everything. And then it was about trying to get her to take a bottle, and it was an absolute nightmare, and my brain was frazzled and I was terrified. And Greg had gone home um, to be with Jade and Haley, and Greg's mum and dad, my mum had come to the hospital, like she'd had Haley and taken her home, and then when Greg went and swapped over, my mum came back to the hospital. But Greg's mum and dad had actually gone on a holiday to Canberra, so they weren't around. So I actually can't remember if they came back once we told them, or if they were only going for a little while and they came back shortly after anyway. But um, Greg's mum and dad essentially held down the fort the whole time that we were in hospital for the whole 11 months. But they came back and they kind of took over the reins with Jade and Haley because I'd essentially disappeared from their life. I did see them, but because Grace was only a baby, I didn't feel confident that I could ever leave her in the hospital alone. It wasn't that it's probably a little bit of not trusting people, but also the fact that, she couldn't speak, she couldn't advocate for herself. So I needed to be there to make sure I knew what was going on. And I didn't want to miss a minute with her. They'd told me that she may not make it. So there was no way I was leaving her. So we were in ICU for a while, probably a week. And in that time, we found out that Grace had ALL, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and AML, acute myeloid leukemia, which AML is actually quite rare in children. It's usually in more of an adult leukemia. I will say right now, it's been 23 years. Back then, I was right on everything. I knew where the ins and outs of everything. Things have faded a little for me now. I don't know if that's been a protection thing for me or if it's just because, I haven't had to use this knowledge in a long time. So please forgive me if I say a word wrong or, it's not exactly correct. I'm coming to you from what my recollections are and my understanding. And if it isn't exactly correct, then that's what Google's for, and people can kind of go and look things up and educate themselves. I'm not here to make things hard for people who may watch this, but this is more about her story than the technicality of names and what she actually had. So she had ALL and AML, very, very rare for someone to have both, especially a baby, is what I was told. So the plan was to put her on chemotherapy and see if we could get her into remission. That was the plan. She'd made it through the night, which was amazing. She was a champion. And then, yeah, she went on to chemo and steroids and had blood transfusions and platelet transfusions. And because the nature of leukemia is that the blasts, which is what we called them, just kept multiplying and pushing out all the good stuff. So she needed lots of blood transfusions, lots of platelet transfusions. So we got her through the week and we were like, right, we've done the week. We can do this. I had hope. I was making plans that we were going to fight this. I was going to educate myself as much as possible and do lots of research. Back in 2003, it wasn't as easy to get as much on the internet, but it was still there. I was planning to go and see um, like a naturopath who was also a I was very, very invested in seeing a chemist who was also a naturopath because I didn't want anything to interrupt anything that was happening chemotherapy wise, but I wanted to try and keep her as healthy as I could with natural things if I could, and continue to breastfeed her if I could. However, because of the stress, my milk started drying up, which was a real shame. But um, I then started taking medication to try and keep my milk supply. That's a whole other story. But yeah, we then went to Banksy Award in the Children's Hospital in Brisbane. That's since been knocked down. It's not there anymore. It's the Mater Children's Hospital now. But back then we were at the Children's Hospital and in Bowen Hills, and that kind of became our new life. However, all the days kind of run into each other. And we were just trying to get through every day as best we could, and we tried to make it as good for Gracie as we could. If she needed a hug, she got a hug. If she needed a cuddle, she got a cuddle. If I had to lie half my body on the bed and on a little cot that she had in there with the railings up, if I had to lie half on it and half off just so that she could feel close to me, then that's what we did. Um, my mum would come in and kind of relieve me to go and have a shower and maybe go and get some fresh air and have something to eat. Greg would come in as much as he could. However, he was self-employed, and if he didn't work, we didn't get paid. And back then, we didn't have things like GoFundMe's. We didn't tell people what was going on. We didn't ask people for money. We just tried to figure it out ourselves and do what we could. We were really, really lucky to have Greg's mum and dad looking after the girls, which was my biggest worry. And then I had my mum coming in and kind of relieving me and supporting me and being another point of reference at the hospital. Um, and yeah, we just tried to muddle our way through. But Greg did have to keep working because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to pay our mortgage. We wouldn't have had a house for our children to come back to or to live in while all this was happening. So it was very isolating, but a lot of people will say this. You'll probably hear this a lot if you've ever had these conversations, and anyone who's gone through this will understand what I'm about to say. But the people that you think are your friends or people that you think are 1000% going to be there for you can and will disappoint you. I don't know if it's because they get scared or they don't know what to say, or they actually just don't care that much. But it was amazing to me the people that stepped up for us, people that I just worked with, amazing, amazing people. I'll never ever, my heart will always be there for, my friend Teresa from work who offered to take the girls to their swimming lessons, and you know people did care packages for us, and people that I just thought were acquaintances were 1000% there, and people who I thought would have always been there weren't. And I didn't have time to kind of dwell on how disappointing that was then, but I did afterwards because it gave me something to dwell on. But anyway, it's really interesting. So there was support, but not in the same sort of support that you'd see today. I mean, within 5 minutes these days, you'd probably have a GoFundMe on the internet, which probably would have helped us. But anyway, um, we muddled our way through. It just meant that Greg was absent more than he needed to. I will say he did have insurance for if if he was out of work, and we did try to go down that avenue because of what was going on. And I will honestly say for the rest of my days, I don't even know if they're around anymore, but I would never ever give any money to AMP or any affiliate or any umbrella company of AMP because they completely made things so hard for us that there was not even an option to try and get some sort of insurance so that Greg could spend time with his daughter while she was in hospital battling cancer. So even though we'd been paying money for if he couldn't work. But anyway, like income protection. So anyway, I digress. Now I'm just getting annoyed that I'm remembering how awful they were to deal with. So we'll move on. So we were in hospital. We were making our way through each day with hope. We were hoping that she would go into remission because she was responding to the chemotherapy. And interestingly, for someone who would I kind of jokingly say she was just a bit of a lump because she slept all the time and there wasn't really any spark to her. And I kept saying to her, you're meant to be here because I knew something was wrong. Ironically, once she started having chemotherapy and she started having blood transfusions and platelet transfusions, she actually got more energy. So although it was still very awful for her and it made her feel sick and whatnot, a sparkle started to come into her eye to a degree. She started responding. She started smiling and gurgling and doing all the things that I knew a baby should have, but the doctor didn't listen to me when I told them that something wasn't right. So it was a real it messed with my mind because I was like, wow, she's supposed, this is a very, very sick child, but she's actually more animated now than she was before we brought her into hospital. So that was really odd. But I think we'd been in hospital probably about 3 weeks when I noticed there was like a little black spot on her nose. And I said to the doctors, what's that black spot? And they said, oh, we'll just keep an eye on it. And, they didn't seem particularly worried. And I said to Greg, there's a black spot on her nose. I'm worried about it. Like it doesn't look right. And I said, I want to take a photo of it. And he said, oh, there's a new thing now. People will laugh at this, but there's a new thing now. It's a digital camera. I'll go and get a digital camera because you don't have to get the photos developed. You can actually just take the picture and it stays in the camera. And I went, right, you need to go and buy one of those. Go and sell something, sell a limb, but get this digital camera. So he went and got a camera, and each day I took a picture, and it was getting bigger. And I finally actually just said, this is ridiculous. Why is no one taking this seriously? And at that time, I feel like at the same time that I finally came to the end of my tether with this black dot getting bigger, they took me seriously. And they said, we'll do some tests, we'll see what's going on. Anyway, they did some tests, and it was actually about 7:30 at night, and I was just putting her down to go to sleep. I just fed her, and I was putting her down to go to sleep, and this doctor who I'd never met before walked in the room, looked at her, and he said, "It's likely that this will kill her. This is a like an infection that you get from water, a bacterial infection. It's rhinocerebral mucormycosis. Apparently, only usually it's common in people with diabetes, but it's essentially because she has no immune system. She's immune compromised, and this bacteria in the water is flesh eating essentially, and it will spread unless we cut it out. And what I didn't know that in that moment was that not only was the dot on her nose, it had actually gone through to the top of her hard palate. So it was actually inside of her skull, essentially, her head. So yeah, he told me that it was going to kill her, and then he walked out. And I collapsed on the ground and just started crying. I didn't even understand what had just happened. And a nurse came in and I told her what happened, and she actually got mad. She was like, "Who does that? That's so crazy. What just happened to you?" And to not have anyone even in here or ask you if you had any questions. And she said, "I'll go and call Greg again. I'll call your husband." So she went and got Greg, and we still didn't really know anything. But the next morning they said we need to take her in to remove it or she'll die. And so we figured that was the only option. No one said to us, don't do this. We were just told that if we didn't do it, that she would die. So we agreed, and she went in to have her operation, and then she went straight to ICU after the operation. And then as we were about to go into the ICU to see her, the surgeon who had done the operation, the same one that had walked into the room abruptly and told me she was going to die, um, he walked out and he just said, she may not make it through the night. I've cut away everything I can. What you've done is cruel, and I wouldn't do it to my daughter. And I remember just looking at him thinking, no one said this was cruel. No one said there's an option not to do this. You told me if we didn't I was told if we didn't do it, she would die. And I thought that was the only option we had. And it's amazing how much stronger you get throughout the journey when you start asking more questions before you agree to things or do things. But at that time, she had only been in hospital a month, and I was still in shock. you know, I had had a perfectly good, like, beautiful bouncing baby 4 months earlier. Like, this was just such a shock to me. And I remember just crying again and thinking, not only is she going through all of this, but now I'm being cruel to her, the person who's supposed to protect her. And I went in and she was in basically an induced coma. They had her on machines to breathe for her and all that sort of stuff. And they said they were going to keep her on that for at least a few days. So I sat with her for days and held her hand and sang to her and talked to her and read to her and did all the things that I could just so that she knew I was there. And they had her on what they used to call M&Ms, which is morphine and medaz. I'll never forget that. For some reason, that's really stuck in my brain, which is essentially to keep her out of pain, I guess, and keep her asleep. But they slowly brought her out of it. And I remember I could only see one little eye to begin with because one side of her face was covered with bandages when she came out, and they'd had to remove the left side of her nose and the top of her hard palate. Um, and yeah, she came out of it, and I was so glad. And I thought, you know what? She's such a fighter. She's going to make it through this. Like, she just keeps proving everyone wrong, and this is amazing. The problem is that because she was immune suppressed, they had to take her off her chemo, and so that she could fight, like actually get better from the operation she just had. So it was one of those things where although it was allowing her to heal from the operation and they were giving her blood transfusions and platelets and all the things that she needed, the fear was that while she was off the chemotherapy, obviously the leukemia could take over again, take hold. So it was a balancing act between giving her time to heal and then actually getting her back on chemotherapy and trying to get her into remission. So we were in ICU for a long time. I remember being in there for my 27th birthday. Sounds crazy to say my 27th birthday now when I think, like, my daughter is almost 27 now, and I couldn't even imagine her going through any of this. She doesn't have a child, if she ever has one, but she doesn't even have a child yet. And I'm like sitting there with my third child on my 27th birthday in ICU with her, hoping that she was going to get better. So we eventually made it out of ICU and went back to Banksia Ward. And a few weeks after that, she actually went into remission, and we were celebrating. We were like, "This is amazing." She's proved everyone wrong. She's such a fighter. We still had to do chemo, but she'd actually gone into remission, and it was so exciting for us. And yeah, I just celebrated, and they let us take her home for a couple of hours one day, so we got to spend the afternoon with the kids, I remember. And then we did that a couple of times. I just said, can I just take her out of the hospital for a little while? And they let us. And whereas now I think I would just say I'm taking her out of the hospital. Back then I was asking for permission for a lot of things. And then we tried to do an overnight, and I learnt all her medications, and I learnt how to use the kangaroo pump, which is what used to run her food and medications through. She had to end up with a nasogastric tube. Well, she had a nasogastric tube to begin with, but I was still trying to feed her. But once the top of her hard palate was removed, she didn't have any suction, so she couldn't. I couldn't breastfeed her anymore. So she couldn't bottle feed anymore, so it was a nasogastric tube, and she was such a little bugger with a nasogastric tube. She was always trying to pull the jolly thing out. So we went home one night. We just got home, and an hour later, she pulled out a nasogastric tube. So we had to go back to the hospital. So eventually, Greg actually learned how to put a nasogastric tube in so that we could have her at home for longer, where possible. But I will have this written down somewhere, but I really just think I've blocked out the date because um, she relapsed. The chemotherapy wasn't working, and her blasts were multiplying. They would do a lumbar puncture. I think it was every Thursday they would do a lumbar puncture, and after this particular lumbar puncture, they said no, she's not in remission anymore. So yeah, there's nothing else we can do. And of course, they'd told me to call my husband before telling me that, and he came in and they just said there's nothing else we can do. And I don't know if I'd do things differently now, but I fought them. I just said, no, no. Do we need to go to America? Do we need to go to a country that has better doctors? Like, what do we have to do? We'll sell our house. We'll sell everything. We'll do whatever we have to do and we'll take her wherever we have to take her. But she's made it too far and gone through too much to give up on her. Like, I'm not giving up on her. And I basically got told that there was nothing else they could do. There was no, she was in the best hospital she could be. She had the best doctors looking after her. It wasn't lack of care that was causing the decision. It was the fact that there was nothing else that anyone could do. So we went home, and I remember just writing an email to her doctor and saying, I'm begging you to think of anything you can think of, even if it's experimental. She's already been through enough. What can it hurt to just try? Like, is there something that you've thought of that you thought anything? Anyway, I sent him this email, and the next day, the next afternoon, he came and saw me and he said, listen, there is a medication that hasn't necessarily been approved. It's still in the early stages of being, tested, and it's 100% experimental. But if you agree, uh, you know, we think that this may work, and if we can get her into remission, we'll actually work on her having a bone marrow transplant. And the reason he we wanted to get like we just wanted to get her into remission so she could have a bone marrow transplant or a cord blood transplant, as it turned out. So we'd actually had Jade and Haley tested to see if they were a match, because siblings are always the best match because they would have, I guess, the most matching DNA. Um, and they didn't match. So then I was like, well, should I have another baby? And, let me get pregnant. Can we have enough time for me to have another baby and see if they're a match? And they were like, no, we need, don't do that, first of all. That's no guarantee. But second of all, we do have a database of cord blood that we can look at and see. Because she's only a baby, she can actually have cord blood. It doesn't have to be bone marrow. So they went away and they actually found a really good match for her in terms of cord blood. Wasn't exact, but it was as good as we were going to get. So at that point, she was on the experimental chemo, and it was all about her getting into remission. Um, and lo and behold, within a few weeks, she went back into remission, and then we went into pre-transplant mode. So we had to go and basically go to every single department of the hospital. I used to walk around with a kangaroo pump attached to the pram, and you know, we would just walk to all the different wards of the hospital and just get all these different tests done. And she had to be fitted for, they were like these foam blocks that she had to be fitted for to so that she could have radiation, because part of the before you can have a transplant, you essentially have to wipe out your whole body of everything. So she was on chemo and she was having radiation. Then that she also had to go and get kidneys checked and organs checked, and all the different tests. So it's a good thing I had a pram, because she had her folders were so full and so chunky. It was like I could have carried two boxes around with me. I had my best friends from school, Megan and Trisha. Trisha actually lived in Canada, but she'd come over and they came and wandered around the hospital with me pre-transplant and kind of supported me through that. And my mum and my sister. My sister was also taking on some heavy lifting in terms of giving Greg's mum and dad a little bit of a break with Jade and Haley. And so everyone, was supporting us as much as they could. And we were getting ready for pre transplant, and we'd put all our hopes on this transplant. So when they found the cord blood match, we were ready to go. So essentially, what happened was we went and did all that. We got ready for pre transplant, and then we went into transplant. And that was on the, oh gosh, what was the date? I think it was the 16th of February, 2004. We went into what was officially transplant. And in that time, we had to go into isolation. So, you had to go through airlocks and all that sort of stuff, and only certain people could come in and whatnot. So, I was in isolation with Grace, and we were just in there while she got wiped out. She had the most crazy chemicals put into her body. she had radiation, she had everything. And I remember I kept getting into trouble because I kept getting on the bed with her. I told them to get rid of the cot and put a bed so that I could lie next to her, and they kept telling me that it was dangerous. And I'm like, are you for real? Like, she needs a cuddle. I need to be able to lie next to her and hold her and sleep with her so that she gets some sleep and that she knows that she's surrounded by love. None of this behind bars in a stupid cot. And it was like metal bars. It wasn't nice. So anyway, they finally gave in and let me get a bed, and I got these overstuffed pillows that I put like on each side so that she couldn't roll through the bars. And I was really vigilant. So I was in there with her. We basically, um, I read to her. I tried to keep her occupied, played with her. She had these little um, round connectable things that she loved playing with, and she'd suck on them. She had colored spoons she just loved sucking on. It was kind of funny, the things that she liked. And we would play her unicorn that we got when she was on ICU, which we still have today. And I think the whole hospital knew the song by the time she left. And it was hello, 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 how are you? Hello, 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 how are you? Thank you, I am fine, and I hope that you are too. Do, 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 do. And she loved it. She would always smile. That was terrible singing, I know, but she loved that unicorn so much, and we used to play it and play it. We played it so much we had to get another one because I think we actually wore out the original one. But we used to play Robbie Williams. I I know I'll never meet Robbie Williams, but I'm telling you, if I ever met him, I would thank him for getting Grace and I through transplant together because we played the unicorn and Robbie Williams. So we did transplant. That was awful. And then the big day came for the cord blood transplant. Greg was there, I was there. It was kind of weird in that there was this calendar on the wall where we were trying to get her blood. We basically had to get her down to zero in terms of different blood counts and neutrophils and all those sorts of things. And each day it was like plus or minus. So pre-transplant, it was about getting her to zero. Then there was transplant day. And then it was all about seeing those numbers come back up again, but in a really good and controlled way. So, yeah, she had her transplant, and it was, don't want to say anticlimactic because it wasn't, because this big kind of cryogenic hub, which I'll show in this video, came in and they pulled out this, but it was kind of like they pulled out this little blood. It just looked like blood in a little bag, and that was what was going to save our daughter's life. It was kind of weird and crazy, and but we were just so glad that we were having the opportunity to do it. So yeah, it got injected into her. So I think there was 4 syringes that they pushed through, and then she went really, really pink because they put this preservative in it that makes them go really, really pink. So she actually, when you think of Wicked, which is out right now, and her being green, well, Gracie was kind of like that, but pink. And so it made her really, really tired. And we had to watch her and make sure she wasn't rejecting it, because that was obviously something that we needed to that was a concern that we had. We weren't even thinking about relapse at that point. We were literally just hoping that she didn't reject this transplant, and she took it on beautifully. It looked like she was doing so well. Like each day it seemed like her numbers were going up as they should, and we were so, so hopeful. And then it was her first birthday was coming up, which they told me she'd never make it to her first birthday. And her first birthday came up, and I'd asked if we could go home that day for her birthday because she was doing so well and her immune system was coming back, and all of the things that were wanting to happen was happening. And we got some bad news a little bit just before that, which was that Dr. Kent was going back to America. I think that maybe we'd made some promises to him in terms of research that hadn't come through. And for whatever reason, he decided that it was better that he go home. And that was a real blow to us because we trusted him implicitly. We trusted him so much. He was so wonderful. If I got to talk to him today, I would still just thank him from the bottom of my heart for the care that he took of us and trying hard and coming to us and saying that we could use the experimental chemo to try and get her into remission so that we could have the cord blood transplant and all those things. And he helped so many people. Um, and yeah, that was a real blow to me because there was so much trust there. Um, but we did get another doctor who, to be honest, I didn't like. She had no bedside manner. She was very blunt. She didn't seem like she cared, and maybe that was some sort of thing to keep her separate from all of the awful bad things that were happening in that ward. We had a 12-year-old boy who, you know, all of the really sick kids were in together, right? So I always thought, oh my gosh, like there's only bad things. No one gets out of this place. But they do. The thing is that you don't see those kids because they're at home. They're living their life and it's amazing and they got through it. And unfortunately, when you're in hospital all the time, the only kids that you see are the really sick ones. So it's one of those things where you kind of hope that you're the one that's going to get out without realizing that lots of people do get through this, which is absolutely amazing. But, when you're in hospital and you're talking to a mum whose 12-year-old is who wants to plan their own funeral, I mean, that is just heartbreaking and something that I still can't get over to this day. So, you know, having a doctor there that really, really cares is so important, and having nurses that become friends, and that are really invested in you as a family and not just your child, but you as a whole family. So, yeah, losing Dr. Kent was one of the worst things that kind of happened in terms of I thought was catastrophic. Um, and I remember getting him a card and like this engraved, it was kind of like an engraved picture of Gracie with a quote from Alice in Wonderland, which is, um, you know, I imagine 50. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's an Alice in Wonderland quote that basically says, I imagine 50 impossible things before breakfast. And that just reminded me of him because every day he was trying to imagine impossible things to help these kids. So if I remember, I'll put the quote up in the video. But um, yeah, that broke my heart. So I wasn't happy that we were having to get a new doctor, but I just thought, no, we're going to get out of here anyway. Gracie's had her bone marrow transplant, sorry, cord blood transplant. We're going to be fine. She has already kind of defied the odds, and everyone's saying that, she was never going to make it. Look at her now. It's coming up to her first birthday. And so I'd asked if we could go home for her first birthday because everything was looking really good, just for the day, and because we were still in isolation, although technically we probably could have gone back out into the ward by then. But um, that morning, as we were getting ready to go, this doctor, who I didn't really like, came in and she said, call your husband. And I was like, no, no, I'm not calling my husband because the minute I call my husband, you're going to tell me something I don't want to hear. So I'm not calling my husband. And one of the nurses just said, Mandy, you need to call Greg. He needs to be here. And they walked out of the room and I collapsed on the floor because I knew, I knew that she'd relapsed, and I knew that I'd made a promise to her when she was going through radiation and having all these toxic chemicals put in her body, that if this didn't work, I made a promise to her because by that time I was at the point where I knew when something was just cruel, and she'd already been through enough. And I remember holding her and rocking her in my arms and saying, you know, I know you got this, but on the off chance that you don't, mummy's not going to do this to you anymore. And so when they said, call your husband, I knew it was over for us. And I called Greg and they told us that she'd relapsed and that they could put her on maintenance chemo and essentially we were going into palliative care. And I said to them, I'm not putting anything in her body that won't guarantee a cure, and I'll only put things in her body that will make her feel better now, not worse. And if that doesn't make her time here with us longer, then That's tough luck for us because I'm not making her feel sick anymore. I'm done with that. If this isn't going to cure her, I'm not putting it in her body. And I also told them that I was going home that day, that I didn't want her to smell a hospital or hear a hospital or beeps or cries or, you could hear when other parents got bad news because it echoed through the halls. You could hear when children were crying because they were in pain. And I didn't want her to hear that anymore. So thankfully, Greg already knew how to put a nasogastric tube in and out because she was still being fed through that. I gathered all her things. I got what medication we needed to go home with, and we went home that day. So that was the 1st of April. And then we had a birthday party for her to celebrate. I think probably about a week later. Nobody knew at that time that she had relapsed. She still seemed quite perky at that point, so it was really good to have that birthday party for her. And, we had nurses that broke the rules and came to her party. That was wonderful. And there was so much love and joy at that party. And I just wanted that for her. I just wanted one more joyful thing before whatever was going to happen was going to happen. And, yeah, slow. I wanted to edit this so that you don't hear this. But this is 22 years later, and at least once a week I still cry. But the spark slowly started going out of her eyes again, and she started sleeping more. And she was surrounded by love, and we got to rock her to sleep on the 11th of May in 2004. And it's interesting that people always think that's the worst day of my life. But I actually think the 27th of June, which I've just realised is my son's birthday. Oh my gosh, all these years, and I never realised the 27th of June was the worst day of my life. I think I started mourning her then. I think I knew. I think I knew when I used to say you're meant to be here. I kind of felt something wasn't right. But yeah, we lost her. But you know what? She was so loved, and she put up such a big fight. And I don't know if I would do anything differently. Maybe I would, knowing the outcome, but as a parent, you can't give up on your kid. And yeah, that's Gracie's story. So that's why there's this absence when I'm talking about plans and all that sort of stuff. And I've left a lot out, lots of stuff, lots more stuff than that happened, but this is pretty intense, and I feel like I'm probably going to have to go to bed for a week after going through all this and talking about it. But she was amazing. Gracie was. And I'm just so glad that, and so lucky that I got to have her for a year, and that Jade and Haley got to have her for a year, that my mum and sister and Greg's mum and dad got to have her. I'm sorry that she had to suffer. That's my biggest regret, that she had to suffer. But you can't, if you think there's a chance to save your kid, what do you do? So, anyway, This is Gracie's story. You just need to know that she's still here with me every day. Every day I think about her, and there's not a day that I don't think about her. And sometimes I cry, and sometimes I can tell the story like it's a story, and then I'm removed from it, and then I'm just telling something that I heard, and then sometimes it'll just hit me, and I think, wow, that happened yesterday. So, anyone who's managed to make it through this, that's gone through the same thing, you'll understand. You then join a club that no one else wants to be a part of ever. You don't want anyone else to be a part of it. Around the same time, there were 8 kids that we knew because we were all in hospital together. That kind of they all passed within a few months of each other. Lots and lots of mourning, and I actually used to get together with a few of those parents. We called it the mourning club, but there was a U in there. um, Mourning, and a few of them I'm still in touch with over the years, and a few I'm not. It got too hard. It got too hard to be able to know what each other's pain. You had to kind of remove yourself from it after a while. Um, and it's a big blur what happened afterwards. I think I went to bed for a long time, and then I thank my oldest daughter Jade for getting me out of bed because she came in one day and she said to me, Mummy, I know you miss Gracie, but she's a part of me. So when you miss Gracie, you can hug me. And I thought to myself, you've just lost a child, but you've got 2 here that need you. You've got to get out of bed. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to wake up again. But I knew I had to get up for Jade and Haley. And I always wonder what happens to parents who don't have that, who don't have to get up, who don't have to get out of bed. And yeah, I got up that day, I gave her a hug, and I made an appointment at the doctor's, and I went and got on some antidepressants, and I made an appointment to see a counselor, and just started trying to get my head above water, started to try and reintegrate myself back into the lives of my children. It was really difficult with Greg because when I would see him in the same place as me, like in the house, I would have this panic because I would think, well, who's at the hospital with Grace? Because for a year we hadn't been in the same place really together, except when they would tell me to ring him at the hospital or he'd come to visit. But we were never at home together for the whole year because if I was at home, he was usually at the hospital. So every time I would see him, it was like a reminder that we weren't at the hospital anymore. I wasn't Gracie's mum anymore because I didn't have an identity for a year. I was Gracie's mum. I wasn't Mandy. Um, and so yeah, that was really hard. Greg and I, um, it was a struggle. Thankfully, he's stronger than I am, and he, oh, I don't know if he's stronger than I am. To this day, he still hasn't really talked about his feelings. I asked him to go to counseling. He didn't go. Um, he's always been really strong for us. I've never seen him cry. I'm not saying he hasn't, but I've never seen it. Um, yeah, it was hard, and it was I don't even have the words for what it was, but I just started trying to get back into the lives of Jade and Haley, and even that was hard because Greg's mum had essentially become their mum for a year. When you're that little, Jade was 4 and Haley was 2, and when they're that little, not so much Jade, but Haley had really just clung to Greg's mum because her mum had disappeared. And they're still very, very close, which I love. But, I would say to Haley, do you want mummy to take you for a walk? And she would say, Gammy can do it, or, no, that's okay, mum, Gammy can do it. Granddad can do it. Mostly Gammy, but, Granddad can do it. Uh, so it was easier with Jade because she was also in preschool at that time. But, she was going to school, so my absence wasn't so noticeable, I guess. But, we slowly got back to, I guess, anything that you could call normal. So we just started trying to get our lives back. But I can honestly say, and this hurts Greg when I say this, and I don't mean to, but um, if it wasn't for Jade and Haley, I wouldn't be here. I know that. I know in my soul that because the pain was too much. And I can thank them, I guess, for being here and being who they are and yeah, getting me through and giving me something to live for. But um yeah, that's this is essentially Gracie's story, and it turns into Stella and Xander's story as well because about a year after we lost Grace, Greg said to me, we need to bring some joy back into our lives. We need something to look forward to. And he said, would you consider having another baby? And I said, absolutely not. Never can I go through that ever again. Never can I put another child through that again. And if there's any chance that that could happen, I would never put my child through that ever again. I even used to freak out if Haley slept in or the kids got a bruise on their knee. I was just hyper vigilant in terms of what if this happens to them. Because I'd made a friend in the hospital who had um, a young boy who he'd actually gone into remission and then relapsed with a brain tumor, and he'd passed, but I found out that she'd also had twins before that, and they were born very prematurely and she'd lost them. So there's no rule that says bad things can't happen more than once. So I was really, really not. And then my mind was also rebelling, thinking, you're not replacing Grace. You can't have another baby to replace Grace. And even though, intellectually, I guess I wasn't replacing Grace, but I also felt disloyal for thinking, well, having another baby will make me feel better. Anyway, he was persistent in a gentle way, in that he kind of said, I just think that it'll bring so much joy and it'll give us something to look forward to. It's not about, replacing Gracie. And I talked to my counselor about it and basically got to the point where I said, look, I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes, kind of the way I've had most of my kids. Let's just see what the universe provides. And pretty much, not long after that, once I kind of said, well, let's just see what happens, I fell pregnant with Stella. And I was terrified. I will say, I didn't add this in. We actually did go and see an oncologist, a specialist, before I fell pregnant because I wanted to know what the odds were. I wanted to know if this could potentially happen again. And what I actually found out that no one had told me while we are in hospital, this is an important part of the story, which if I'd known this while we are in hospital, I would have made some different decisions for sure, was that um, Gracie had a chromosomal abnormality, and the easiest way to describe it is that she was always going to make leukemia blast leukemic cells. Essentially, it's like having a train that's on the tracks going in the right direction. And even though you have the train tracks going in the right direction, for some reason, this train will always, just by the nature of the way it is, will always decide to derail at a certain point and go in a different direction. And that's essentially what this chromosomal abnormality would will do. And there's really no way to cure that. So but thankfully, the odds of that happening again was something like one in a gazillion. That's not technically or scientifically correct, but that's essentially what I was told. That was the that was the meaning behind what I was told, was that the odds of it happening again were like it wouldn't happen again. And I was also offered to have um, a cord blood test when Stella was born. So as soon as she was born, they would take the cord blood away and test it. Although I guess at that point in time, that the horse is already bolted from the stable, but we decided to take a chance. So yeah, we had Stella in 2005, in October 2005. And she did bring joy into our life. It was a really difficult pregnancy for me, though, because I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my mum one day, and she said to me, we've got to get the baby's room done. And I couldn't, it was still Gracie's room. Like it hadn't changed. I hadn't gone in, like I'd gone in there, but I hadn't changed anything. In fact, I still have her baby bag that's packed from the last time I used it, um, kind of packed away in a cupboard. So, you know, there was no way I could go in and take her baby room away. And so, I'll always be thankful mum took one for the team in regard to that. And she said, we'll just totally rejig it or, redo the room, redecorate, or we'll completely swap rooms if that's better. Um, but we did end up swapping rooms. We just kind of did a big rotation with the girls, and um, it was better to have a different room. So she did it up, chose the pretty things. But I remember sitting at the kitchen table and just started crying. And I just said, I feel so guilty because if someone said to me I could have Gracie back right now or have this baby, I'd have Gracie back. I still feel guilty about saying that. But I also think maybe it's normal. I don't know. Probably my counselor told me it's normal. I don't know. That's just how I felt at that moment. But, I also it's funny, I went to a psychic just for fun. And before I even knew I was pregnant with Stella, and they said to me, this baby that you're going to have is going to be a force of nature, and you don't need to worry. She's going to know her place here. And I just thought, gosh, that's a very specific thing to say, considering you don't know I'm pregnant. Like I was just pregnant. And the funny thing is, she is such a force of nature. And when she was little, you'd say to her, "Oh gosh, you're so clever and you're so smart. You're so beautiful and you're so kind and all the things." And she'd kind of toss her hair and be like, "I know, mummy." So she's never been unsure of her place. Well, as a young girl, she was never unsure of her place in the world. She always knew that she was loved and that she wasn't a replacement. So, and she definitely, certainly did bring some joy back. Although Jade and Haley also gave me the joy I needed to get through the day. Um, I will say that, you know, we had Xander in 2008. So Greg then said, "Oh, all these girls, can we try and have a boy?" And I said, "We could end up with 20 kids if we keep trying." But also we did take them up on the cord blood option to get it tested when Stella was born, and they rang me about a week after actually, and I was too scared to take their call because I thought, what if they tell me it's bad news? But they didn't say call your husband before they told me. They just said, hey, we've got the results. So, um, yeah, everything was fine there. No chromosomal abnormality, no issues to speak of. So, um, yeah, that was that. And then we had Xander in 2008, and Greg got his boy, although he became my boy because, he was, I don't know, boys are funny with their mums. We're just very close. Uh, and yeah, that was our family. At that point, I said, kitchen closed, no more kids. I will say, just to kind of finish up here, every single day, like I said, I do think about her and anniversaries and special days. We celebrate, we have birthday parties for her. I'll put some pictures in here about some of the birthdays we've had. My daughter Hayley is a really talented cake maker. She's so creative. All my kids are really artistic, and I'm not at all, which is interesting. But Stella would make the cards, or Jade would make the cards, and we would every year we celebrate her birthday. We make a cake. Um, she has her decorations on the tree. She's acknowledged Stella and Xander from a very young age, knew that they had three big sisters, um, not two, and she's a really big part of their lives. They're very aware of her. She is still a big part of everything that we do in our home and in our hearts. So, um, yeah, that's Gracie. Now, the only other thing I'll say is people say, "How do you live through that?" And I kind of can't remember how I got through it. I'll say I'll give Jade and Haley all of the credit for that one. Um, some good some good antidepressants that for some reason I thought were going to make me happy. I always thought antidepressants were there to make you happy, but all it did was kind of just take the big 20-pound concrete that was kind of weighing down on me and kind of lift it a little bit and give me some breathing space. But counseling certainly helped. I got to go there and be as sad as I wanted, or as nasty as I wanted, as vicious, as selfish, all the awful things and all the good things and all the sad things. It was someone that I could kind of say it to without hurting them or hurting their feelings or worrying about, how what I was feeling was going to affect them. So 1,000% advocate for counseling, getting onto medication if you need to, and admitting that you need help, and just keeping those connections with friends who continue to reach out to you. You do lose some more friends when you lose a child because some of them, I don't know if they think it's catchy, but sometimes I think they just get scared and they don't know what to say, so it's easier not to say anything. But the people who showed up, I'll always be grateful for and thankful for, and I'm still friends with 99% of them to this day. So you know who you are, and thank you. So this is going to set, and I don't, I live around it every day. Anyone who's listening to this or anyone who's lost a child, you don't get over it, you get around it. I look at my kids and I look at my life and I know there's a big hole there. There's something missing every single day and I can't live with it necessarily, but I just learnt to live around it. I know it's there and I figure out how to get around it. And some days it's harder than others. Um, but yeah, it's that's Gracie's story, and she was more than the leukemia. And I hope you see that in the photos that I'm putting up and that I'll share here today. I've talked for a long time. This is this has gone on for a while, and I also want people to know that it wasn't, she wasn't just forgotten, and the cause wasn't forgotten. Childhood cancer support was such a big help to us throughout. They were so supportive, and they have so many resources, and they used to provide accommodation for parents who didn't live nearby, and just so much help. Um, they're probably the biggest charity that I really admire and that did do amazing work. Um, I used to give some speeches for them way back in the day. At some point, I kind of moved away from it because it just hurt too much. But if anyone ever asked me for help or anyone needed anything, then, I was 1000% there and happy to share my story if I thought it would help anyone. And anyone who's listening to this, this YouTube channel is about our new adventure that we want to go on, um, and the preparation that we're making in the next year. But one of the big preparations that we are making is to get the kids ready for us to, for Greg and I to go off on our adventure. And I will say too, a lot of people say, oh, marriages don't usually make it through something, the loss of a child. Like it's really difficult to not only just navigate a normal marriage, but then you add that in. And I will say we did lose each other for a long time in there, but we worked hard on coming back to each other. And does he drive me crazy? Yes, he does. But was he the man I needed him to be when the worst thing in my life ever happened to me? He 1000% was. I got to forgive him for all the smelly socks that he left lying around and his work boots and his Milo cups and all the rest of it. They were just little things. When I actually needed someone to step up and be a man and be a partner, he was. So that went a long way to, helping us find our way back to each other when we did lose each other throughout the years. So, um, yeah, Greg probably has his own story to tell, although he's kept quiet about it for all these years. So, I'm the talker, but yeah, I recommend medication if you need it. I recommend good friends who'll listen when you want to talk about it. And I recommend counseling 100%. And I have gone back to counseling on and off throughout the years because it's not something that you go in the beginning and then everything's fixed. You kind of have to revisit over time if you need to. So I also love when people mention Gracie to me, people who knew her, people who visited her in hospital, people who's told her story to, and they're still touched by it. They still remember Gracie and they still remember her birthday and they'll say happy birthday. And, you know, those people are gold because I love that people still acknowledge her. I'll never be sad that people acknowledge her. It doesn't make me sad when people acknowledge her. It makes me sad when I feel like she's been forgotten. I don't get angry if people don't mention her, but I certainly do love it when they do. So, on that note, I'll finish up and I hope if you've made your way all the way through this that it hasn't been too traumatizing. I hope maybe you've got something out of it. And if you can relate, then I'm sending you lots of love and thank you for listening. So, thanks for listening to Gracie's story.